The air of Lyra's Reach always tasted faintly metallic, a side effect of the vast orbital refineries floating above. On the streets it was no different. Endless streams of air cars and the glowing signs of interstellar corporations made the city feel more like a machine than a home. But on that fateful day, the machines ground to a halt. Citizens crowded every street-level plaza, their faces turned upward toward colossal projection screens that broadcast the Imperial Court's final decree. A woman's face filled the display. She had sharp dark eyes and a calm, defiant expression. Layla Torin. She was more than a journalist. She was a voice that spoke directly to the hearts of every colonist who had ever felt the crushing weight of imperial oppression. Over the past decade, her investigative reports had exposed the Empire's systemic abuse. Bribes to silence planetary. Governors' entire habitats abandoned after resource extraction left them uninhabitable. Entire species quietly wiped out when they resisted the Empire's relentless expansion. The verdict was swift. Layla Torin has been found guilty of sedition against the Imperial Order and conspiracy to incite rebellion. The judge's voice echoed coldly through the square. The penalty is death. Around the city, hushed whispers gave way to angry murmurs. The Empire hadn't just convicted a dissenter, it had made her a symbol. Layla stood straight and unbowed as they read her sentence, even as her hands were bound and Imperial guards escorted her out of the courtroom. The image cut to her journey to the gallows. Lyra's Reach had never seen a public execution like this. In fact, few colonies had. Public trials, yes. Shamed figures hauled off into unseen prisons, certainly. But a hanging was something ancient, something meant to terrify. The Empire wanted the colonies to know what happened to those who challenged its authority. They chose Layla precisely because she was too beloved to kill quietly. It was an act of violence dressed as a show of power. The broadcast flickered as Layla was escorted to the high platform. No words passed her lips, yet her silence was more deafening than any plea would have been. Her presence demanded that the galaxy bear witness. No one could tear their eyes away, not even when they saw the noose placed around her neck. In that final moment when the lever was pulled, something shattered. It wasn't just a life lost, it was an unspoken contract between humanity and its rulers. Layla's body fell, and with it, the fragile illusion that the Empire's order was unbreakable. The reaction was immediate. In Lyra's Reach, small protests ignited in the plazas and undercity corridors. On mining moons and remote settlements, workers staged quiet slowdowns, their acts of defiance rippling outward. Rebel networks that had been dormant for years suddenly found themselves flooded with volunteers. Hackers lit up comms channels with encoded messages. "She didn't die for nothing. We won't let it end here." What the Empire hadn't understood was that Layla Torin's words had already planted seeds of resistance. By hanging her, they hadn't silenced her. They had amplified her message. Her death became a rallying cry, one that spread like wildfire through the colonies. From the innermost settlements near Earth to the distant frontier worlds orbiting alien suns, people began to whisper her name. They remembered her investigations, her courage, and most of all, her defiance. Layla Torin became more than a journalist. She became a martyr, and with her death, humanity's simmering discontent began to boil over, setting the stage for a conflict that would engulf the stars. The Empire underestimated humanity's capacity for outrage. It wasn't just grief that followed Layla Torin's execution. It was something far more volatile. On the mining moons of Orion's Shard, the once passive laborers simply stopped drilling. The Empire's shipments of raw dysonite, critical for its massive fleet construction, halted overnight. Imperial overseers found themselves locked out of production bays by workers who spoke Layla's name in quiet reverence. In the agricultural colonies of Solara, farmers withheld their crops, sabotaging delivery convoys meant to feed Imperial garrisons. On industrial hubs like Arcturus Forge, engineers modified assembly lines to produce black market munitions instead of the authorized construction drones. These acts of defiance seemed small at first, but they multiplied. The galaxy's human, Frontier began to act with one voice, a quiet murmur of rebellion growing into a roar. What the Empire failed to realize was that Layla Torin had already laid the foundation. She'd spent years exposing the cracks in their system, broadcasting truths that even the Empire's omnipresent censors couldn't fully suppress. Her words had lingered in the minds of countless colonists who, after seeing her hanged, felt the weight of her sacrifice. Now they asked themselves what they could do to honor her. For many, the answer was simple: fight. Rebel cells that had operated in near isolation began linking up, their encrypted communications suddenly filled with coded messages, supply requests, troop movements, targets. The United Colonies Alliance, initially a scattered web of sympathetic human settlements, began to take shape. In the early days, it was no formal army. It was a network of smugglers, insurgents, and disillusioned ex-imperial soldiers, each bringing their own experience and resources to the fight. What bound them together wasn't a shared flag or central command, but a single name: Torin. The first open confrontation came on Novus, a lush world turned factory planet, long exploited by the Empire for its rare minerals and bioengineered flora. In a daring strike, a team of renegade engineers hijacked the planetary logistics hub. They overloaded the Empire's data relays, rerouting vital supply orders to resistance outposts while Imperial ships sat idle in orbit, waiting for deliveries that never came. This victory emboldened other colonies. The Alliance began to move from scattered acts of rebellion to coordinated assaults, targeting Imperial supply lines, communications, and patrols. Suddenly, the Empire wasn't just fighting rogue elements. It was losing control of its outer territories. The rebellion gained another unexpected ally, the discontent brewing within the Imperial Navy itself. Captains and commanders who had grown disillusioned with the endless conquests began to defect. They brought with them ships, weapons, and most importantly, knowledge. Former Imperials taught the rebels how to navigate complex star charts, how to evade the Empire's surveillance nets, and how to outmaneuver the massive lumbering fleets that once seemed invincible. In these early days, the rebellion's strength wasn't in firepower, it was in speed, adaptability, and the sheer will to fight. Word of the resistance spread faster than the Empire could suppress it. Propaganda broadcasts meant to instill fear instead carried subtle messages of defiance. A fleeting image of Layla Torin's face, a slogan etched into the corner of a poster, a single line of a poem she'd once written appearing on comm screens. In the middle of the night, the Empire tried to stamp out these messages, but for every transmission it blocked, another found its way through. The colonists had begun to believe, and once they believed, they acted. When the Empire finally responded with overwhelming force, bombarding entire settlements, imprisoning entire populations, it only fueled the rebellion. The brutality of their reprisals proved everything Layla had claimed. The colonists didn't see imperial justice, they saw tyranny laid bare. And as the Empire tightened its grip, more and more colonies slipped through its fingers. It was no longer a question of if the rebellion would continue, but when it would strike next. Layla Torin's death had been meant to silence dissent, but instead, it had become the match that lit the fires of resistance. By the time the Empire realized it had a full-scale uprising on its hands, it was too late to extinguish it. The spark of resistance had turned into a flame, and that flame was spreading faster than anyone had dared to imagine. By the time the Empire recognized the full scale of the uprising, it was too late to contain it. The rebellion had coalesced into a formidable force, with its growing fleet of repurposed freighters and stolen imperial vessels striking where the enemy least expected. The United Colonies Alliance, once a ragtag collection of insurgents, had become a legitimate military power. But their strength wasn't merely in numbers. It was in their tactics, their alliances, and the fierce determination that had spread like wildfire across the outer colonies. The rebellion's first major offensive took place in the Deneb system. A key supply route for the Imperial Core ran through Deneb 4, where orbital refineries processed rare isotopes that fueled the Empire's mighty dreadnoughts. The United Colonies launched a three-pronged assault: orbital strikes to disable the Empire's defenses, precision sabotage teams to dismantle the refineries, and a blockade to cut off reinforcements. The battle was intense, with the Empire throwing wave after wave of ships into the fray, but the Alliance's unconventional tactics turned the tide. Armed with alien stealth technology acquired through new alliances, the Alliance outmaneuvered the lumbering Imperial fleets. By the end of the campaign, Den the Four's refineries were offline, and the Empire's critical supply lines were in disarray. As the war escalated, the Alliance's leadership forged unlikely partnerships. A species called the Ulquari, known for their telepathic coordination, offered critical support. Their ability to share information instantaneously gave the Alliance a decisive edge in space combat, where split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and annihilation. The Ulquari's technology and expertise were quickly integrated into Alliance fleets, allowing human commanders to predict and counter Imperial maneuvers with uncanny precision. Other alien allies soon followed. The Jintar, a reptilian species, whose advanced shield generators could withstand even the heaviest Imperial bombardments, joined the fight. They had been subjugated by the Empire centuries ago. Their homeworld turned into a mining colony. With the Alliance's promise of freedom, the Jintar lent their engineering expertise, fortifying key Alliance outposts and making them nearly impervious to attack. For the first time, the Empire faced a foe that was not only relentless, but well-equipped and well-defended. The most unexpected support came from within the Empire's own ranks. Former Imperial officers, disillusioned by the regime's cruelty, began to defect. Some were inspired by Layla Torin's message. Others had grown tired of fighting for a cause they no longer believed in. They brought with them vital knowledge of Imperial strategy, including the locations of hidden shipyards and the weaknesses of the Empire's most powerful vessels. These defectors, coupled with the alien alliances, gave the rebellion the strategic edge it needed to shift the balance of power. The battlefields expanded beyond space. On planet after planet, Imperial ground forces were forced into costly, prolonged skirmishes. The Alliance had learned to use the terrain to their advantage, waging guerrilla warfare that wore down Imperial legions and drained their resources. Entire colonies were transformed into fortress worlds, with sprawling networks of underground bunkers, hidden artillery batteries, and well-supplied resistance cells. The Empire's forces, designed for swift conquest and occupation, found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition. In the Empire's core worlds, fear began to spread. News of the rebellion's victories trickled in despite strict censorship. Citizens in the core, long isolated from the realities of Imperial oppression, started to question the narrative they'd been fed for generations. Small acts of defiance emerged even in these heavily controlled territories. Graffiti bearing Layla's name appeared in alleyways. Encrypted broadcasts from the Alliance circulated through underground networks, and wealthy core worlders began funneling supplies and information to the rebels. The rebellion's fight was no longer confined to the outer colonies. It was creeping into the heart of the Empire itself. As the rebellion's strength grew, the Empire's response grew more desperate. Massive dreadnought fleets were mobilized, entire sectors placed under martial law. The Emperor himself declared that the rebellion would be crushed within the year, ordering a brutal campaign of planetary bombardments intended to break the colonists' spirit. Yet each act of violence only fueled the Alliance's resolve. What the Empire had not grasped was that this war was no longer about territory or resources. It was a war of ideals. And in that war, the Empire was losing. The scales of war had tipped. The United Colonies Alliance was no longer an underdog. It was a force to be reckoned with. The rebellion's victories were not just tactical, they were symbolic. Each battle won, each planet liberated, became a testament to the enduring strength of freedom and unity. And as the Empire's fleets limped home, battered and broken, the galaxy began to see the Empire for what it truly was, a dying relic of a bygone era. The Empire's once mighty fleet orbited the scarred world of Earth like vultures circling a carcass. It was their final gambit. After years of losing ground, the Empire sought to destroy not just the heart of the rebellion, but humanity's oldest symbol of endurance. Earth, the birthplace of the United Colonies Alliance and the homeworld of Layla Torin's ancestors, was to be obliterated as a warning to any who dared defy imperial rule. In the void above Earth, the massive imperial dreadnought, the Judicator loomed, a planet killer bristling with firepower. It had been decades since such a weapon was deployed, and its appearance was meant to terrify the scattered remnants of the resistance. The Emperor himself had ordered its activation, hoping that the annihilation of Earth would finally extinguish the rebellion's defiance. The Empire broadcast its intentions widely, giving the world one final opportunity to surrender. But no one in the Alliance even considered it. The United Colonies Alliance responded with everything it had. Frigates, corvettes, and a handful of cruisers, all hastily retrofitted with stolen alien technology, streamed into Earth's orbit. On the planet's surface, fortified bunkers bristled with anti-orbital weapons designed to buy just a few more precious minutes. Civilians were rushed into deep underground shelters, praying that their defenders could hold the line long enough for reinforcements. Everyone knew this battle would determine the war's outcome. The Alliance's leadership, a council of seasoned military commanders, rebel operatives, and alien strategists, had crafted a desperate plan. A team of the Alliance's best infiltrators, armed with stolen clearance codes and camouflaged in Ulquari stealth fields, was to board the Judicator and disable its main weapon. This weapon, a massive planetary annihilation cannon, had the potential to destroy Earth's atmosphere in one strike. The infiltrators had one objective: prevent the cannon's firing at all costs, even if it meant their lives. As the infiltrators slipped into the Judicator through maintenance ports, the main battle raged. The Alliance fleet swarmed the Dreadnought's escorts, their smaller, faster ships darting through the massive vessel's firing arcs. Ulquari commanders relayed telepathic commands with pinpoint accuracy, coordinating strikes on key targets. Jintar shielding technology absorbed punishing barrages, allowing the rebels to push closer to the Judicator. Each skirmish was brutal, but the Alliance's determination outmatched the Empire's discipline. The skies above Earth became a chaotic ballet of explosions, plasma trails, and burning hulls. Inside the Judicator, the infiltrators faced relentless resistance. Imperial Marines, aware of the stakes, fought with desperate ferocity. Corridors turned into kill zones. Bulkheads became barriers, and every meter gained was paid for in blood. The team's leader, Commander Rena Valak, pushed forward, knowing time was slipping away. She carried the memory of Layla Torin with her, using it as a source of strength. For her, she whispered under her breath each time she breached, a new compartment, as if summoning Layla's courage in those moments of terror. Finally, the team reached the control room for the planetary cannon. What they found was worse than they'd anticipated. The weapon was already charging. The massive energy coils glowed a menacing orange, casting eerie shadows across the walls. They had minutes, maybe seconds, to stop it. With surgical precision, the infiltrators planted explosives on the cannon's power regulators. They hacked into the control systems, redirecting coolant away from the weapon's core. The room became a storm of chaos, the team fending off waves of defenders while completing their sabotage. At the moment of detonation, the entire cannon chamber erupted in a blinding light. The power coils burst, sending shockwaves through the ship. The Judicator's primary weapon was destroyed, its fearsome energy dissipating harmlessly into space. The massive dreadnought trembled, but its structural integrity held, for now. The infiltrators had done their job, but at a high cost. Only a handful of them made it back to their extraction point, and not all of them survived the final firefight. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Alliance fleet turned its full fury on the Judicator. With its main weapon offline and its support ships reduced to burning wrecks, the massive vessel was vulnerable. Alliance ships poured fire into its hull, focusing on its engines and command modules. The combined firepower of human and alien allies overwhelmed even the Judicator's formidable defenses. The Dreadnought's reactor finally gave way, and the resulting explosion lit up Earth's night sky like a second sun. The death of the Judicator marked the end of the battle, and with it, the Empire's last real chance to crush the rebellion. The victory was not just military, It was symbolic. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had survived. The colonies had stood together. The alien allies who had once been conquered by the Empire now fought alongside their former human adversaries. The rebellion had proven that unity and resilience could topple even the most oppressive regime. In the months that followed, the Empire collapsed. Isolated worlds declared independence. Entire fleets surrendered rather than face the resurgent alliance. And in the Empire's capital, long subjugated species staged their own uprisings, inspired by the humans who had once seemed like just another conquered race. Layla Torin's image became a universal symbol of defiance. Statues and memorials were raised in her honor on 100 worlds, her writings preserved and studied by generations who would never know her personally. The martyr's legacy, as it came to be called, was not just about her death. It was about the unity her sacrifice inspired, the alliances it forged, and the freedom it helped win. As the galaxy began the long process of healing, one truth remained clear. The Empire had hanged a woman, but in doing so, it had sown the seeds of its own destruction. Humanity and its allies had not only survived, they had found a new purpose in building a future where no voice would be silenced and no power would reign unchecked.